guys, so a lot of you have been asking about my experience growing up biracial. Well, today is your day because I'm going to share with you my story. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you click that subscribe button. It'll make me very happy. You don't want to miss out on future episodes. So for those of you that don't know, I have a biracial background. Is that how you say it? My dad's white and my mom is black. My mom and my dad, they met in such the cutest way. They were both in high school. My mom, I mentioned this before in one of my videos, she is from Miami, Florida. And my dad, he was from Boston, Massachusetts, but at a young age, he had moved from Boston, Massachusetts over to Miami. I know this may get a little uncomfortable, but when you're talking about biracial parents, you kind of have to talk about racism. So with that said, growing up, my mom was on one side of the town and my dad was on the other side of the town. And he said that there was a railroad track that would kind of separate the two towns. Now, my dad lived, over in an area, it was a little segregated, where there was predominantly a lot of white people, and my mom lived in an area where there was predominantly all black people, and my dad would always go over there on the other side. I asked my dad, I said, Dad, when did you guys actually meet? And I think he said they met like in 9th or 10th grade. Like, that's like really, really young. Because of the tension that sometimes comes along with dating outside of your race, my mom, she couldn't handle it anymore. So she decided to break up with my dad. And to get away from it all, she enlisted herself into the Army. And my dad found out. And my dad was like, you are not going anywhere. I am in love with you. And he basically followed her into the Army. So that's why and how both of my parents ended up being in the Army. They were so young and they were madly in love and they were just like, we're gonna elope. And that's what they did. And then they ended up having my sister and myself at the age of 21. I just think it shows that if you really, really, really love somebody, no matter what's going on, no matter what the noise is behind you, you'll find a way. And that's exactly what they did. Growing up, we never really, really had the conversation of your dad's white, your mom's black, you're mixed, until we as children started to experience racism outside of the home. And then that was the first time I remember being aware of my mom is black and my dad is white. Because growing up in the house, we never thought about that. You know what I mean? Like, that's my dad, that's my mom, they love each other, we're a family, boom, that's it. But, sometimes when you get out into the real world, most of the times when you get out into the real world, you get hit with reality. And not everybody is nice. And I remember I was actually called the N-word when I was living in Texas at the time. I was in 3rd grade, so that puts me, at 7, 8 years old? And I remember being called that, and it was just really weird. And I knew that something was wrong because of the reaction that I had gotten around me. Remember, I was near my locker, and it was this boy, and I actually had a little bit of a crush on him. He was really cute. He was a white boy, and he called me that, and I was like, okay. And then, there were kids around us, and then the reaction of, what I had just heard, that's when I knew. I was like, okay, this is wrong. This is not right. And so that's when I went home and I had discussed it with my mom and my dad. And then that's when I remember them sitting down and clearly having the conversation with us and explaining to us about race, explaining to us about racism. They were just so full of love, you know what I mean? And they continued to instill in me that love is greater than all of that. And what was the most amazing advice was their actions. So when they were telling me that love is greater than all of that, and then when you see them together and they're black and white, that is the biggest advice that you can get, is when you see it coming from, actions and them being, an example. To be honest with you, I got over it rather quickly. It was just like, okay, because my parents handled it so well. I think where it was tough for me was definitely in high school. So when I was in high school, you had the punk rock kids, you know what I mean? You had the hip hop kids, you had the Valley girls, And I could never find where I would fit in. You know what I mean? I couldn't fit in with the white kids, and I couldn't really fit in with the black kids. So where I found myself fitting in was with the mixed kids. So there was like this group of kids that were just all mixed kids, mixed girls, mixed boys. So that was rather interesting, growing up in high school. Where I started to see more racism, really, was with my parents. I would see how people would react and respond to my dad, and then I would see how people would react and respond to my mother. My mother, she's dark skinned, she's beautiful, she has this chocolate beautiful color, and I would see how people would treat her, when we're getting on an airplane. It's so weird how there's a lot of stories about airplanes, and what's so interesting, it's because airplanes, when you get on an airplane, you're separated by class. And what I mean by that is finance, right? You got first class, and then you got economy. And so there's just a lot of stereotypes that come along with that. And I think that's why you see a lot of it in racism when you're at the airport or getting on a freaking airplane. It's because it's so evident that there's that separation there. So I would see that with my mom. We would be getting on the plane, and then, people would automatically assume, that she's in economy, and and they would say like, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you in first class?" And then my mom would be like, "Well, I'm here with my husband and my children. You didn't ask my husband." I grew up with a white father. So my dad, I didn't experience racism with him. But now I'm living in a household where my husband is black. The racism that I experience with him is mind blown. I had to learn how to adapt to, seeing my husband get questioned about him buying something very expensive. My husband was walking into some sort of pharmacy, and he had on his backpack, and, the security guard is literally like questioning him. First it started with him eyeing him down and then asking questions, and it's just weird. You know what I mean? Because I didn't grow up with that sort of behavior with a male figure living with my dad. But now living with my husband, I do see that. And then not only that, my son. The first time I had to sit down and talk with my son about race was when my husband and we were having a conversation about police brutality. And, my son was there, but we were just in our own little world, right? We were just like talking about what happened, da 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 da. And my son goes, "Mommy, I'm afraid of the cops. I'm afraid of the police." And that was when I literally had to sit down and have a conversation with him about, racism and how certain people of a certain race can be treated differently because of the color of their skin. And then not only that, he was told that his skin color, the brown color, was not a pretty color. And he was told that at 5 or 6 years old, and he was at camp. And so here he comes home telling me that, and I'm like, oh Lord, here we go. So I ended up, having a conversation with the camp counselor. They ended up talking to that kid's parents, and we ended up sorting it out. But, that's when I had to sit down and have the conversation with my son and say, son, we live in a society, in a world where not only are people treated differently by the color of their skin, but they're treated differently by their, sexual preference. They're treated differently by, their socioeconomical status. I literally had to, have this conversation, and I wasn't expecting to have this conversation at such a young age. But then I think about it. My parents had to have that with me around the same age, because I was in 3rd grade. And then here I am, my son's like around 5 or 6, but that's still young. It's young. They always say that with men, they're attracted to women that look like their moms, right? And then with women, they are more attracted to men that look like their dads. Growing up, I liked all kinds of guys. You know what I mean? I had crushes on white boys, I had crushes on black boys, I had crushes on Latinos, you know what I mean? All races, really, I had crushes on. I didn't really date a lot, to be honest with you. Corey, I had mentioned this before, he's the only guy that I've ever dated, and I ended up marrying him. My husband has a lot of my father's qualities as a person. My dad is very patient. My dad is very kind, shy at times, quiet. He's very nurturing. He's always wanting to make sure that you're okay. And that's my husband. So I guess what I'm saying is my husband's not white, you know what I mean, like my dad, but my husband is like my dad when it comes to here and the heart. And that's what I'm attracted to. Now, if you want to know about my experience growing up being a twin, click the annotation right there. See? I'm right there. I'll see you over there. Bye.